Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, David.
How's everyone doing today? Is it a good Tuesday for everybody?
So far, it has been a very nice one. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hello.
By the way, I like it how we create our agenda in very short notice, and we still have a lot of topics to talk about.
Let's see. Was there anything else added? I don't see anything, any other topics added.
So there was one topic from Chris about the cloud native landscape adding Wasm, or other way.
Oh yeah,
he posted this as a topic. I would suggest to add this for discussion today because he asked for feedback and PRs projects. So I think we should cover this today. As with every working group Wasm meeting, there will be the question of who will be the moderator and also like who will be the note taker. I would volunteer for the moderator this time, as I was always checking out for the last occasions, which means we still need a note taker.
I can volunteer for note taking for this one.
Okay, thank you. Cool. Okay, we're already 9 participants in the meeting. 4 minutes past starting time, so I would suggest to start off the meeting. And welcome to today's working group Wasm community meeting, a bi-weekly meeting of a TAG-Runtime working group. My name is Christoph Vogt, I'm today's host, and with me is Angel today, who will take the notes. I want to remind you that this is a session that will be recorded and published on the internet. So if this is not something that you feel comfortable with being recorded, feel free to turn off the camera and or mute yourself. We will directly start with the agenda with one of the first items, which is the WasmCon on September 6th in Washington, USA. Is there, who wants to kick this off?
I'd be happy to. I just wanted to add in that PSA just to make sure everybody is aware of it. If you're interested, please see about attending. There should be lots of great speakers. excellent topics, and I think we'll see a lot of cool component stuff. So it's going to be a great conference, and I look forward to seeing folks there. If you find me or if you're going, please say hi. I'd love to meet people in person that haven't met yet. So
very cool. I will also bring some Wasm stickers. So if this is something that you have not right now, I already have them. Okay, next up, again, David, you recently posted a proposal for Containerd shim lifecycle manager. I think it makes sense that you maybe share the screen and like go shortly over it.
certainly. Give me one moment. And also, please pardon me if you hear dogs in the background. They are kind of wild today. So I will share my screen. And please let me know if you see that.
We see that. I'm on a 13-inch monitor and it's a little bit narrow in size. Maybe you can increase the size a bit. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Good. Fantastic. Okay, so with KWasm, we saw the introduction of a shim manager, if you will, as an operator, which made it a lot easier to install shims, Wasm shims particularly, on nodes in your Kubernetes cluster. This is kind of an error-prone operation. You can easily mess up your container deconfig. Understanding how handlers and runtime classes map and how the Kubernetes scheduler deals with scheduling workloads, pod workloads onto nodes in your cluster that have a given shim installed is non-trivial. And what I wanted to do is put together a proposal for a more generic shim operator lifecycle manager. And this document, as linked in the notes, goes through an introduction into the problem, talks about what KWasm has brought to the community, and where we could possibly go further. If you're interested in what it looks like to, one solution is that you bake nodes, you bake virtual machine images with your shims that you want to have installed pre-baked into that image. We do this in Kubernetes Image Builder, and there's a link in the doc here to that if folks want to go check it out. Basically, it's just like Ansible tasks that go and grab binaries, put them onto the machine in the path, and add that to your container deconfig. This isn't terrible, but what that does is, those images take a lot of time to bake, and then if you wanted to update shims or add more to those machines, you end up having to rebake images. So that's kind of a time-consuming process. And then when you get a new image, you have to then roll that out to your cluster. It's slow, it's cumbersome. You end up rebuilding nodes. And when workloads land back on nodes again, those nodes are fresh. They have to do all their polls, and it ends up being a pretty costly enterprise, just rebuilding machines and machines and machines. And that's good. That's okay. You can do that in some situations. That makes a lot of sense. If your workloads are pretty static, it's not that bad. But I think we could, with as fast as the ecosystem is moving, we probably want to have an easier way, instead of baking images, to get any kind of shim that you want onto a machine, and to make sure that the runtime classes, the handlers, and all of the configuration that goes into managing shims within a Kubernetes cluster is taken care of for you. So within this proposal, I've started to sketch out a CRD for an operator to be able to define a shim, define a node selector in which the shim will land on. So perhaps, we labeled nodes in the cluster as, Wasm true. And maybe those are the nodes that we want to target with this CRD, with the shim install. And then a fetch strategy, you could imagine we're pulling down, gzip tars from GitHub, or perhaps some other, blob store or something like that. Or you can imagine maybe pulling down an OCI artifact or something else. So fetch strategy tells us how we can go and pull that thing down. And then I wasn't sure if we needed an unpacking strategy or something like that, but I wanted to kind of keep it as lean as possible for first edition. And then we have runtime class. So the way this runtime class would probably be expanded would look something similar to this. So we have a runtime class that we would apply, the name of that runtime class, and then how we would like to schedule it. So the handler and scheduling, handler ties back to the container deconfig. In container deconfig, the handler has to be named in a specific way, thus these underscores for a version of a particular shim. So if the actual file name is this, maybe the handler looks like this, or we structure the file name to be consistent with the handler. And the handler is stored in your container config and tells containerd, like, when I get something, a pod that has to run, it has to run with this handler, and then that ties it back to the binary. And then we have scheduling. So we can use node selectors, or we could use task tolerations, something along these lines, where we could describe to the Kubernetes scheduler, this pod can land on these nodes. And that informs the scheduler for where it can send workloads. So we do all the stuff in Kubernetes right now for AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, but it's all fairly manual in our baking process for releasing new shims. I'd love to put this in the hands of users, so users can control what their clusters consist of and where their workloads land. And then a rollout strategy. So how do we want to install these? Like, how can we roll these out so that, say we go through like the first handful of nodes and we realize, my goodness, this is failing. Okay, we don't want to just like take down our entire cluster. Perhaps maybe we make a handful of nodes unavailable for a period of time, which may be acceptable, or you can figure out what your level of acceptable loss is in nodes, and have a window of update. Then finally, status, just a conditions, a condition structure. I wasn't exactly clear exactly what I want the status to look like, but just start throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks. I'm sure there will be more to fill out there to inform a user what the state of a rollout is, or perhaps, I don't know, whether or not something completed successfully. I'm not sure. But these are just thoughts put together to start a discussion about this. The doc goes through it, talks about what the lifecycle, the controller lifecycle would look like. Again, I think this needs to be fleshed out a little bit more about the actual actions that take place on node, and really describe those in detail to fulfill, installation, mutation, uninstall. The main goal of install, uninstall is to start with a node that is available and containerd is running, and always end with containerd in a running state. So if in fact there was a bug in containerd config mutation, could we then roll back to previously known good state and have the node always be okay after a mutation? So I think that's about it. Any questions?
I have a question regarding the general life cycle of what the controller is managing in the end. I was mentioning this concern also in one of the commands in the run wasm thread. So the controller basically has to restart container D, and container D will refuse to restart once the configuration is malformed for whatever reason. My question is, how would or should the controller deal with this? So should it have an option to basically have a rollback? Or should it be in a way that it's like, okay, this needs to be done by the administrator. He needs to debug the issue or troubleshoot the issue, and not mess with any magic, which is not directly obvious to the administrator or the user of the controller. Because the reason why I think this is an important concern is that like if you have something like a pod and it's not starting, it will say something like it's pending or it's broken, and you can troubleshoot it, but all the other pods on the same node will still start. In this specific case, we entirely wipe the container runtime interface, and which means that the entire node is useless in the end. Of course, the rollback should probably stop. No, I'm sorry, the rollout should stop rolling out. But what do we do with container D in the end and its config?
So the way that I was thinking about it is before a mutation, we create a backup of the current config. So maybe like underscore container D config or whatever, wherever that it is on that particular node. K3s is going to store it in a different location than some other distributions. We probably also have to tell the installer strategy how and where the container config is, or at least give an option to be able to say where it's at. So if you make a backup of it and you just copy that file before mutation, at the end, if it doesn't successfully restart, like you say system D restart, container D, service restart, container D, then just replace that config with the backed up one, and then fail the rollout and provide notification of the failed rollout with whatever step information you could say. Perhaps adding a condition of false with error severity type, and then transition reason, failed to restart, message, whatever content human readable that we could put in there.
Yeah, definitely makes sense, and especially like the idea of like adding this to the condition. My assumption would be that the the rollout would not proceed in this case, right?
Yeah, that would be my hope there. Like you don't want to do like 100% rollout and just take down everything. I mean, maybe
do
maybe
nothing.
you do like YOLO rollout. I would be weary of that.
Any other questions? YOLO is fun to say.
If smart questions are done, I have some basic questions to ask just for my own learning and edification, if that's fine. Do we have any other agenda items or anyone else queued up? No?
Okay.
So with the container shim before KWasm, you would had to have baked that into like a VM image, an image that was like, and you had to take care of all the, how that got to all the nodes, and it was, very asynchronous sort of cycle, and a bunch of work. So then the first layer up above the container shim was KWasm, which is an operator, and it kind of allowed you to kind of more dynamically, like once you have the operator installed, you can tell the operator to please deploy these containerd shims across the nodes. And then you're saying the previous way or the current way that the operator works, isn't as useful as it could be. And this is like an extension of that operator, or is this a layer on top of the operator?
I think this would be an extension of. So KWasm specifically targeted the containerd Wasm shims. So this was a few shims, a few binaries that would be installed onto the machine. And this did not handle runtime classes or any other higher level constructs. Basically, it was just like install them onto the machine. They're there. We now have handlers for containerd, and then you can apply runtime classes. You could apply, labels, taints, tolerations, however you wanted to handle your cluster afterwards. This is just a more opinionated extension to KWasm to, I guess, put folks into be able to install any shim. So not just a specific set. You could tell it where that tarball gzip is, so that you can drop that into a bin directory on the path. So containerd can discover them, and then you can take away or at least give a happy path for folks to then be able to use the shims with pod workloads without having to do any other manipulations of the cluster. So you could imagine applying this CRD, the operator then does the installation process. And then at the end, you could apply a pod workload that targets the runtime class that you expect it to make.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds super useful. So just to test, can I take like let's say a vanilla Kubernetes, install the operator, first the KWasm operator, and is it just a thing I can have packaged up such that I didn't have to, like, I don't know, take down the cluster or like, have changed how it was built? Like I can do this, apply this operator to like a vanilla Kubernetes cluster that has, I guess, containerd in it. And then the operator then brings in specific containerd shims that have specific Wasm runtime builds of Wasm runtimes. And all of that I can just like have done to a live, like, running vanilla cluster. Is that right?
Indeed, that is the goal. And the other part that's probably missing is actually architecture. So I totally like hand waved like ARM64 versus like AMD64 and what bin and selecting that. That's probably something that would need to be updated in the proposal as well. But yes, a vanilla cluster should be able to start. We take this like Helm chart, apply it, the operator's then installed, ready to go. And then we can apply CRDs to the cluster and enhance the ability of the cluster to run these other workloads.
It's very cool. It's almost like the way you deploy a container, except this isn't a container, right? It's like a substrate, but it's a little like how you might deploy a container, yeah? Or like sort of the workflow, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest sense, you could go and SCP a binary into a directory on the path, and then go and run a command and mutate the containerd config. And now that single node is able to run a workload. But then you have to also add a runtime class so that Kubernetes understands this, and then you can schedule workloads to it. This kind of does that in mass. And takes the foot gun away.
Very exciting. Thanks for answering my
Luke,
questions.
when you want to see how we do it with KWasm and the vanilla cluster, there is an episode of Raw Code where we do this live, and we can post the link afterwards. And we already created an issue regarding this hackmd to test the CRD in the KWasm project. So if you look to in the operator, there's already an issue if we can, for testing, implement the CRD, see if everything works. So we had some ideas around upgrading if we need to tweak it a little bit, and we wanted to test it. So if somebody wants to join, just look at the issue. We can post it here and just join the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to get a link to that video. Check it out later.
I think this
Just
also
in addition
has.
to this,
Oh yeah, yeah.
there was also a presentation about Wasm in the last working group Wasm.
Yes.
So there's also some showcasing Wasm. Sorry, David, for interrupting you.
No, that was more in line with that last comment. I think the other good part about this is if we make it generic to any kind of containerd shim, then it's also a project that we may be able to upstream into containerd proper and start to garner more support across the community.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because it seems like containerd shims has been around for a long time, but since there is interest in the Wasm community, it exploded. I mean, everyone created a shim for that. So it seems that it's a very interesting technology, a very interesting way to expand the capabilities of containerd in terms of Kubernetes, your local development environment. So having it generic could increase the number of use cases that other people may bring new capabilities using custom shims that you guys. So I think that's pretty exciting to me.
And maybe to even add on this, like when we first created Wasm, it was with the intention of making it easier to try WebAssembly workloads on Kubernetes, fully knowing that this is like an intermediate step, basically, and the intermediate solution, and that there will be like more fully fledged solutions. And having this more generic, as Angel said, would be even great. Okay. We already reached almost like half of our time. Are there any last questions regarding I'm sorry, not Wasm, about the proposed shim control implementation, or otherwise we would proceed with the WebAssembly landscape? Okay. Then anyone volunteering to talk about the next agenda point from Chris? Otherwise, I would do it as well.
So maybe can anyone share the screen with the current status of the landscape so we can take a look and see? Because I think he was asking for feedback not only about the projects that we already have there, but also the categories and how the landscape's organized. So I think it would be nice to see.
Exactly. So you should be able to see my screen right now. So maybe just a couple of introductory words about it. So the idea was basically to create a pendant to the existing CNCF landscape, which already grew a lot during the last years, and like create an pendant for the WebAssembly ecosystem, which basically would give you an overview of technologies, of languages that somehow tie into the ecosystem. And I think this has been kicked off like quite a while ago, but yeah, it was not actively maintained. But also like with the like recent trajectory of this working group, there have been people who started to maintain this project here again, or this landscape again. And yeah, Chris was basically asking for feedback and for missing projects or things that might be missing. I think this feedback was also in terms of like categories of like whether they are reasonable in this way as they are currently are, and also whether there are any missing categories. Yeah. Anyone here with some thoughts about it? This one comment from Sven. that the Wasm worker server is missing, obviously, on the landscape.
Yeah, I need to open the PR. Yeah, you're totally right about that. Yeah. So I have a question, because one thing that makes me think is the case of application frameworks, because I know that anytime I think on application framework, I'm thinking more as a library that helps me to develop applications. But it's true that recently, since some years ago, that started to merge with the concept of a server, because you have the same time application frameworks that can act as a server to start serving application that you just developed. So I see, for example, here, like we have application frameworks like Spin, for example, which is the framework, but also the server or the actual platform that you can deploy. And we have also at the same time Edge and Bare Metal. So I still wonder what's the difference. I think for Edge, it seems that it pre-focus on maybe small devices or things like that. But I'm not sure. What's your take about this?
I'm sorry, who was it directed to, or was it directed to the group?
Yes, it was for the group. I can give you an example. For example, watching, for example, Wasm Worker Server or Spin or Wasm Cloud, it seems to me that you can deploy, for example, then on a bare metal environment. So it seems to me that it fits in both boxes. But for most of the platforms that works in the same way, they will be placed on both at the same time, because they act as an application framework, as a server that can be deployed on bare metal, cloud, or many different environments. So yeah, I'm wondering if this is fine, or if we should repeat them in different places, or just keep them as the, let's say, highest abstraction layer, which is the application framework. It's just more idea of a comment, no?
Maybe a similar comparison would be Wasm Cloud. So is it really an application framework, or is it also like a platform or a decentralized platform? I mean, Bailey, I guess we were at least in the call. Maybe have a take on it. Oh, I think she's not in the call anymore.
Yeah, I think Bailey had dropped.
Ah, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I think she dropped.
But in any case, I also see that there's like some room for that things could be doubled or repeated. Maybe it's up to the maintainer or the owner of the organization who's like adding it to the landscape. So in the case of Spin, like if Firmian is adding this framework to Spin, to the landscape, maybe they identify more as an application framework than on a Edge or bare metal solution.
That sounds good. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think you bring up a good point, though. There's what is the differentiating characteristic? So is it that you are able to deploy it to, and the definition of edge is different for many folks.
Yep.
So edge could be, the CDNs like edge network, POPs, or is it edge is on a client device, a device that maybe is running within your network and is maybe an offload for some compute that may have happened in the cloud. I think we have to figure out what that differentiating characteristic is, and then we'll have a better indication of where one fits or the other. Luke, do you have any insight in there?
Only just to agree that yes, edge is a fuzzy term that means anywhere in that spectrum that you covered, all the way to like small client devices, all the way to what we call CDN like POPs.
Yeah, sometimes we can even put browsers there.
I've heard that too. Yeah. How edgy is your edge?
Now that I'm looking onto it like more thoroughly, I'm thinking about the category of languages, of the like whether it's reasonable to list languages here. For a couple of reasons. So on the one hand side, even if you list the languages, it doesn't give you an implication of like to what extent a WebAssembly spec is implemented. So it doesn't give you a sense of the quality of its implementation. And furthermore, I wonder whether this is the right place for listing languages or for getting informed about like which language is implementing this spec. Does anyone have thoughts or similar thoughts than like me?
And I would ask you which spec. So are we talking like WASI Preview 1? And then when WASI Preview 2 comes out, is that the spec that we're targeting? I also hesitate to do that because is that going to be information overload for folks too? I kind of lean towards, here are languages that are working towards implementations of WASI and WASI Preview 1 and perhaps WASI Preview 2 in the future. These are, I feel like that's probably the level that folks were targeting, is that there's movement in these languages for implementation. How well, that's a very good question.
Agreed that kind of as it is now, yeah, there's much more of a Cartesian product going on of like, well, this language works on this platform because of a particular integration, and this language works in this way because of a particular integration. So it's a lot more difficult to summarize in a succinct way what the state of any language is. However, post preview 2 time frame, when there's just this component model, you can ask the simpler question of, do you have WIT bindings? Because if you have WIT bindings, it almost doesn't even care what the particular interface is, right? Whether it's WASI or whether it's my own company's thing or whether it's some community defined WIT interface. It's just, do you bind to the component model? Can I produce a component targeting a generic world defined in WIT? And that's a more simple binary yes or no. I guess there's quality, there's degrees of quality, but at least if the answer is yes, a basic thing exists, then that might be maybe a new bar that would make sense in the next year time frame. At the moment, doesn't make sense because the stuff's still stabilizing, but next year maybe that would give a more crisp answer of like, yes, this language kind of fully supported across this whole ecosystem.
Okay.
I also think the goal here is less about completeness as much as awareness. So, hey, we're trying to show the breadth of the vibrancy of the ecosystem. I think that's pretty critical as well.
A newcomer to the community, I think having the language, even if it doesn't apply to all the runtimes, it's still helpful to know it's there. It's possible for some runtime.
Okay. So Chris, in case you will see this video, here you have our opinions. No decisions at all, but our opinions at least. If there are no other comments, I would. Okay.
Yeah, I have one latest comment. I'm thinking about hosted platforms that use some runtimes that supports WebAssembly, but they are not targeting WebAssembly as a main feature, let's say. So for example, we have Cloudflare, we have, I don't remember the name, but there is an open source, like similar project that allows you to write functions that you can run in a JavaScript context. At those platforms, you can run WebAssembly workloads. Basically, it's not the main feature, but since they are using VA, they are enabled WebAssembly under the hood, so you can use those. Do you think those should be placed here too? Or since they are not the main focus? I think, in my opinion, they should be here just because you can do a lot of stuff with WebAssembly. And some of them even creates tutorials and things like that.
So
Yeah,
I
like,
think in
yep, sorry,
this point
go
in
ahead.
time, sorry for interrupting anyone. I think in this point in time, it's fairly easy to like add the platforms, as there are probably not that many. My only concern would be that in the future it might be way more platforms, and like again the value would somehow decline in listing all of them.
Yeah, so maybe in that case we can restrict to the platforms that at least try to promote the WebAssembly use case. Because it's true that some just focus on JavaScript mainly, and then there is the case in which they provide more information about, hey, this is the way you can run WebAssembly. Maybe we can start with those, and if there is interest for others, they can always add later.
The runtime that's already listed, can those be further sub-categorized into more, like, to tell the differences?
Can you provide an example, maybe?
I know. So I know, for example, WebAssembly is no longer just for Edge, right? It could be also used for data center computing, my understanding. So for the runtimes listed, are they all for Edge? I guess, can they be applied for both Edge use cases and non-Edge use cases? And what's special about each of them? Right, there must be some special differences when it comes to architecture and design, right? So is there any difference at all?
There are definitely differences in the runtimes. Like, for example, Wasm-wg, Wasmer versus Whammer, size, how big something is, like the binary for execution, applicability to running on a constrained environment, perhaps, the ability to do TLS. There's all sorts of differentiation in the runtimes at this point, which is kind of good and kind of bad. But it would be interesting. I wonder if there's some kind of, like, maybe high level features or something that could differentiate. I'm not sure that that's modeled on other landscape cards. However, that may be useful.
Did I understand you correctly that you would add like the differentiating factors to every group?
Honestly, I'm not real good with UI. I wouldn't, propose to know how that would necessarily work, but it's definitely something that's doable. And I think in the current environment, it could be helpful. Like, as Victor's saying, what's the difference? Why would I choose one versus another? And that's actually a conversation that we have a lot, or at least that I've had a lot with folks, is, why would I choose this versus this, as far as runtimes go?
And maybe again, this is like back to my question in the beginning. Maybe it's more like about the perception and acceptance of the, on the one hand side, of the community, like what is it used for, and like where do we see it in real world used, and where can you use it by maybe adjusting it, or what can you also do with it? Yeah.
like different, like if a two runtime is for the same purpose, same use cases, the actual choice will depend on whether it's doing a lot of things right. So and a lot of plugins or whatever. But if what I'm trying to say, if it's designed differently, totally different groups, then if there's a description, it'll be a lot easier to make that choice. Yeah, for example, is there going to be a small footprint runtime versus large footprint runtime, whether it's a remote versus enterprise data center runtime. If there are those differences, I think those can be put in there in the front so that the choice is easier in the beginning.
I agree. Holger was raising his hand.
Yeah, I was wondering if we need a card for the different shims that are available. I mean, some of the runtimes have a shim, some don't. Some things that have shims are not runtimes, or they're application frameworks. I'm not very familiar with all these landscapes, but should there be a card for products using WebAssembly that are like publicly known to use WebAssembly?
I don't have an opinion, and if not anyone else has an opinion, I would suggest to look on the normal landscape and see how this is dealt here.
Yeah, my only comment is that I'm not sure if the slides, I mean, I'm not really, also not very familiar with the landscapes in general, but I'm not sure if they list here only open source projects. So maybe that could be a limitation in terms of the product. If the product is based on an open source project, could be fine, but I'm not sure about that.
The gray cards are normally non-open source. Or that,
the gray cards.
That's what the legend says.
That case, no. In that
I don't know
case,
why. I don't know why C is marked as non-open source.
In that case, for me, it's fine. I think it's good to see like different products adopting WebAssembly under the hood as a foundational technology or kind of the main technology that they offer. So I think it's good to add.
I was mainly thinking like, when you go to an open source project and it says it's used by, and you have like big company names, and that gives you kind of some confidence.
That's true. And again, going back to what David said before, like it's like first like getting an overview and then see how it's used and see how it's adopted, and not necessarily about like the completeness of like to list every single company and every single product which is using WebAssembly or like related to WebAssembly. Okay. Any other comments? Any other things that needs to be or worth mentioning here? Otherwise, I would ask the question whether there's anything else that needs to be discussed within this working group, not necessarily about the WebAssembly landscape. Okay. Seems like this is not the case. In this case, I would like to say thank you for your participation today and see you in 2 weeks. Oh, one question. Do we see in 2 weeks like remotely, or do we see beforehand in Washington, Bellevue?
That's true.
That's a very good question. The hybrid in Washington, Bellevue.
I will not
it would
be able
definitely
to.
Nice.
Yeah, we need to find a way to have like a big screen or something like that.
Well, I would be happy to volunteer some Microsoft conference space while we're there if we need the room.
That's amazing.
Yeah. would be great. I think then we can sync offline.
Yeah, if you
Excellent.
can keep like an open invitation for people who can't be there physically, I would be
Yeah.
happy.
That's
Awesome.
the idea.
Well, thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for taking notes. Chris, thank you.
Thank
for
you very
leading it.
much. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone, for Christoph for hosting the meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.